Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode or edition of Education Matters with Jim O'Connell. You're very welcome. It is, if you're watching live, it is August the 15th, Tuesday evening at 6 p.m. And of course, you're very welcome. The call-in number, as always, is 640-3091. That's area code 603-640-3091. Over the coming weeks, I have reached out to, just to let you know, I've reached out to the school board, the current school board members, and invited all of those who are running for re-election invited them to join me on this program to offer up what their proposals are, what their stances are, whatever they would like to. I'm not prescribing it in any way or limiting it in any way, but some of them have agreed to come on, so we should see some of the candidates, etc., on here over coming weeks. Why I bring it up now is because I'm having difficulty thus far in just contacting the candidates. I'm thinking about, I'd be happy to have aldermen, candidates for aldermen on here as well. So anybody who happens to be watching this who is a candidate for school board or a candidate for alderman, whether current, previous, or whatever, if you're running this year, please reach out to me, and I'd be happy to schedule a time between now and November 7th for you to come on and offer your viewpoints on this show called Education Matters, and I try to keep it to Education Matters just as much as possible. But I guess for aldermen, the city at large is certainly, and issues across the city are certainly fair game to discuss as well. And of course, you, the public, ladies and gentlemen, this is public access television, so by definition, it encourages people like me, a private citizen, to partake, and it allows you, the citizens of Manchester, to have your voices heard. So. As we're sitting here with 2.5 weeks or so left to go to the start of school, I think it's September 5th is the first day of school for children, and so that won't be long in coming. And this week, August 15th, so starting yesterday, August 14th, was the beginning of tryouts for the high schools for all the various sports. So a lot of young men and women around the city are anxiously wondering whether they're going to make teams, or whether they're going to make a varsity team or a JV team or whatever it may be over these coming days. So I wish them all well. And I hope everybody else is getting ready to go back to school, because before we know it, it'll be here on top of us again. And in my house, I happen to have, of my 4 children, I have 2 of them preparing to go to university. So it's that time of the year, it sort of focuses the mind where you get used to having them around for the summer. And so we'll be busy over the next couple of weeks getting ready to transport a couple of young adults off out into the university world, and that brings its own challenges, etc. And while as a parent I know that I will miss them, it's also a time of reflecting on their achievements and seeing them do well. So that has its benefits. Also, I have to mention a couple of things from my own personal world with regard to sports and soccer, etc. And though I've recently stepped down as the president of Manchester North Soccer League, and also with my involvement, or my direct involvement with the British Coming Soccer Camp, I'd just like to acknowledge that this past 2 weeks, in the north end of Manchester, the British Are Coming Soccer Camp celebrated its 25th consecutive year here in Manchester. It started out 25 years ago for a couple of years at East soccer over at Paddon Field, and then moved to Livingston Park, and has been going on there for 25 years. And there was a wonderful reunion of people who had been involved over the years. each year, about 20 coaches come over from England, and some of them come back year after year, and they stay with various host families around Manchester. So there's a wonderful binary connection that works between these host families and the coaches who've been coming here for many years. But what I think it's worth bringing here is that it's an example of one of the many socially impactful and important things that go on in the wonderful city of Manchester on any given day, where there are so many opportunities for young people and for the community in general. That's a program that I've gotten great value from. I love to see the kids who I meet who come back year after year, or the ones who are long gone and they come back in their late 20s or 30s and have fond memories of their time there. So I just encourage people, I think, to go out and be involved in what's going on in the community, and there are some wonderful opportunities for us in the chattering classes. I like to talk about it. Sometimes we get caught up in the blow by blow of city politics, and in particular the machinations of our school department. And what keeps me sane, ladies and gentlemen, is the fact that there are some sort of real-world things going on, despite the often challenging and sometimes nonsensical things that we see happening within our school board. We have a meeting tonight in Manchester. There's been a hiatus over recent weeks. Generally, the Board of Mayor and Aldermen and the school boards do not meet in the month of August and for most of July. So we are sort of back to business, with last night being the first, the most recent meeting of the Board of School Committee. Unfortunately, I didn't get to see all of it, or much of it, as I was otherwise engaged. And then tonight we have the Board of Mayor and Aldermen meeting, which should also be very interesting. I know that, and that will be at 7 o'clock. So right as this, if you're watching this live on Tuesday night, the Board of Mayor and Aldermen meeting is live, will be live at City Hall at 7 o'clock. And it's worth going on Channel 22 to look at the beautiful new cameras that have been installed at City Hall, and the upgrades to City Hall that happened while it was being renovated during the summer. And so it's like a new day from the point of view of the quality of the images, etc. there. I wish that the quality of the discussion had improved alongside the quality of the images, but so be it. Tonight's meeting of the Aldermanic Board, it would appear that that there are a couple of items that will be front and centre. I wouldn't have them as front and centre, but the items are: one is an agreement with 4 different work units within the city for new contracts, and each of these 4 contract bodies, the agreement is for a 2% increase year over year, and so the battle lines are sort of drawn. People are in a political mode. There is an election coming up in what is a primary election coming up in September, and then a citywide election coming up on November 7th. And so, even though our school board and our Board of Mayor and Aldermen would purport to be non-political, it is quite political. So I don't really spend a lot of time. I've learned on the school side that that there's a lot of detail, and that one has to take a lot of time and study quite a bit and learn quite a bit before one has a nuanced opinion. Often it isn't as simple as it seems, and so when I look at on the city side, I'm much less equipped to talk in detail about the city side. Obviously, as somebody who's lived in Manchester for 20-something years, I like any other citizen who's of the city who's paying attention, know some things, but it's not the same level as education. So the 4 contracts that are up tonight, on the city side are for 2% increases, and so we have people saying, well, that's going to blow the budget. Where's the money going to come from in the budget? I think the 2% across all four units, according to the union leader, the total cost for the year amounts to $118,000. So that's what the cost for all these employees would be. We did have the police officers at the end of this past session got a 3% increase, and then just before the Board of Mayor and Aldermen broke for the summer, there was a vote on a contract for the fire department, which would have seen them get a 3% increase also, but it was voted down by the Board of Mayor and Aldermen. So it'll be interesting to see, given the heightened political spotlight on individuals, what will happen with the agreements tonight. But my 2 cents for what it's worth, and I admit at the outset that this is not a I don't spend a lot of time looking at this. But 2%, I do know this, that in the last year, the average pay increase, the average, not the highest, not the most, the average pay increase for employees in the United States was 2.8%. That's what the average person got. So if you're watching this show and you work somewhere and you didn't get 2.8%, I feel bad for you. If you got nothing, well then, you obviously deserve you deserve some increase in payment, given that there are increases in costs, etc., for you to live. So 2% doesn't seem like an extraordinary amount to me. The challenge becomes, how do we pay for it? And just like on the school side, that's where the challenge is. How do we pay for this? And that's where people should concentrate their minds. I think those who simply say, there isn't another dime there, we can't afford this 118,000, therefore we can't afford to give people a 2% pay increase. It doesn't bear scrutiny with me. I don't. We make lots of choices every day as to what we spend money on and how we spend it, and the city spends a lot of money on a lot of things, and chooses not to spend money on so many other things. So $118,000 is a lot of money. But to satisfy four contracts, or to go with the 2%, it seems to me it's about 2/3 of what the average person in the United States got for a pay increase last year. So it's certainly not crazy. And given that the economy is at the state that it's in, that unemployment levels are at the all-time low levels that they're at, et cetera, the question becomes, and I mentioned this last week, if Manchester can't afford. If the city of Manchester can't afford this in this day and age, at this time, where we have close to full employment, where we live in the 5th or 6th richest state in the United States, it seems to me that if the only stance of somebody is to say, well, where's the money going to come from? We just can't find it. I think the challenge is in finding it and deciding how we as a city will be able to afford to pay for the services that we desire. If we're paying more than we should for some services, I'd love to hear about that. And if we're paying for services that we don't need, then great. Let me go back to. I want to go back to the school side, but there's one thing I did want to mention tonight and not forget it, which is because of the elections coming up, and as I mentioned, students heading off to college. My son happens to be a freshman, so he and his buddies are heading off for the first time. They also happen to be, many of them, first-time voters. And so at 18 years of age, we know that as you go down through the age groups, that the percentage of young people who vote is much lower than the percentage of older people who vote. So I would suggest to my friends and to everybody, or anybody who has a son and daughter, whatever their political persuasion is, you can go right now to City Hall and you can request an absentee ballot. You can actually vote right now at City Hall already and cast your vote for the upcoming primaries, where there are primaries. Like where I live in Ward 2, for instance, there are 5 people running for the aldermanic seat there, and I think 2 for the school board. So there are places where there are interesting races. There are 4 candidates for the mayor's race, for instance. But anybody who's about to head for college, whether they're 18 or 21, 22, a vote would be a terrible thing to not use. And regardless of how you vote, please, please, please go down to City Hall, make it your business in the next week and a half before you depart for college to get yourself a ballot. You can vote as I said, in the primary already, and then request an absentee ballot, so you'll be in a position to vote wherever you may be, whether that's here within the state or whether you're out of state. Let's not let it not go unsaid. Of course, it's very important that if you find yourself in Massachusetts or New York or wherever, you can only vote in one place. So choose whether you're voting, or you can only vote once. But in this case, it's not a presidential election; it's a state election, or a city election. Sorry. So I guess the thing to do would be to have an absentee ballot, so you could vote here. So back to the school side. I did watch some of the school board meeting last night, and it just struck me that some of the things we're doing. So in order to bring the budget in at the number we wanted to bring it in. Remember, 165 million was what Mayor Gatzis proposed. 170 million was what was required in order to retain the existing services and people and personnel. And what we ended up with was 167. And in order to shoehorn our services into that budget. And a sidebar here, my biggest objection to this whole process always is that what we do is we pick a number and we decide what services we will supply for that number. We never at any point make an attempt to look at what is the right number for this school district and how we might fund that. So be that as it may, we did have cutbacks. I did talk last week about some of the additional programs that were being added back in, and that is good. But the cutbacks we're seeing is we've seen them to the custodial services. So there's less money and going to be paid for custodial services. So therefore, the janitorial staff will spend less time in schools. For instance, the exterior windows of school. I noticed that one of the things was we will abandon the cleaning of the outside of the windows of the schools. That's one thing, and we will reduce the amount of hours that people are cleaning every day. We'll also there's a whole list of things that are going to be affected, and so we're pulling I think 380,000 or something like that out of that contract. But this is a private contract between Aramark and the city of Manchester, and so it is a great excuse. I'm not saying this will happen, but it's a wonderful excuse for a private vendor to be able to perform less well than they might otherwise, because there's a sort of a double benefit to this. One is they're able to squeeze the lemon a little more, and also they have an excuse for what now might be not the services we're used to getting. I am amazed that, given again the financial standing of the city and the way in which our city is growing and what is going on, all the other great things that are happening in our city, and I look at, as I mentioned at the top of the hour here, all the wonderful community programs and efforts that are going on, and groups that meet, and just in every kind of activity one can imagine. The city is alive and vibrant and diverse and exciting. And yet we have this albatross. Our local government has its hands tied behind its back by a group of, by a mindset that's very small-minded and limiting. And I don't know how we got ourselves to this place, but it is disturbing to me no end that that's where we are. We already see, it isn't as though our schools were were being perfectly well maintained prior to this, and it makes no sense in my worldview to be cutting back in areas like this. We're also cutting back on the school nursing program, where we've managed to maintain the actual number of nurses there, but again we're shoehorning it. In the case of the custodials, for instance, there's an expectation on behalf of Aramark themselves, who said that the custodial staff are going to be reduced by 1.5 hours, I think, per night. And so some people who've been working in individual schools for many years, since the Aramark contract started, they're getting a pay cut of 1.5 hours per day, as I understand it. That's a significant pay reduction, and so it's likely that some of these people will there'll be some attrition because of that. But isn't it extraordinary, ladies and gentlemen, that you work? We have our teachers who get pink slipped, and it comes right up to assistant principal level, and we which we did last year, eliminated assistant principal, and it comes right up to the most senior ranks in our school district. We had a lady a few years ago who had spent 32 years teaching in a school, and she got moved. So there's no place safe. And now we have custodial staff in our city who are being asked to have the same pride in their job, to keep the school clean and to have a pleasant demeanour every day, to be pleasant to the kids, to take pride in their jobs, but yet we're going to take 1.5 hours pay off of you. And you all need to know that the custodial staff in the schools of Manchester are not living high on the hog. These are not people who are earning large salaries with large benefits, etc. So this is the way in which the city of Manchester is deciding to run its school system. I think it's appalling. I think the people of Manchester, I continue to believe that the average person in the street is just not paying attention. Tell me, how does it make sense to stop cleaning the windows and the outdoors outside of our schools? So not alone will the image of West and Central and Memorial and MST and all our middle schools and grade schools, not alone will their image, or the image that people have in their heads and their perception of those schools, but now they'll have dirty windows on the outside as well. We're not going to clean the outside of the windows. Maybe that's something that we'll have PTOs and PTGs and parents groups and volunteers do as well. There is no excuse. I think anybody, when Mayor Gatsas and other existing candidates walk up to your door and knock on your door over the next few months and want to talk about things, ask them to explain why we would eliminate to save, I think it's $14,000 for the year or something. It's not a large amount of money, but we would abandon cleaning the outsides of our schools. It's just appalling to me. I just don't understand it. Other than it's a wish to see our schools as badly funded as they possibly can, and that it's just extraordinary. Another another little thing to note at last night's meeting, there was a moment when we had a guest on this show a few weeks ago, school board member Ross Terrio, who's a very conservative guy. I think he described himself as a conservative. He certainly describes he's a Republican. I think he describes himself as a conservative. I view him as a very conservative guy. He and I differ, but as we've noted before, we like with many people on all sides of the political divide, we're able to have conversations. But Mr. Ross Terrio brought up last night the issue of driver's education in our high schools, and it is a total mess. It's the current vendor is it seems to me not performing adequately for the city. I think as I heard last night, School Board Member Terrio say that there is one class, whatever that might be, it's a 2-month-long class, but there's one class offered this summer into the fall at Central High School, one at West and one at Memorial, and that's it. and it's wholly inadequate for the needs of the district. I have to tell you, I have a daughter who's 17 who did driver's ed last year, the third of my three kids to do driver's ed. She ended up doing driver's education in Amherst. So we used to drive 40 minutes out to Amherst to do driver's ed and drive her back after 40 minutes, so many nights a week and on the weekends, because there were, not because we wanted to go to Amherst, believe me, it was because there was no availability in the program in Manchester. Now, up until a few years ago, I don't know exactly, maybe 4 or 5. The city of Manchester, we had our own people, employees, who, for a stipend, did driver's ed. And so, because by its nature, no students can do driver's education during the school day. So it's like the perfect opportunity for school teachers, because their availability coincides with the students' availability. So if a teacher, of the 1,000 or so teachers and staff in our school district, if they're trained as a driving instructor, it's the perfect sort of after school activity for them. And so this program ran for years, and then there was some money. There was a question about money. I don't ever want to say things that I don't know factually, but I know that there was an issue about bad governance, and so money, something to the tune of $100 and some thousand in the end, was not properly accounted for, and so, whether that was by malfeasance or just by mismanagement and incompetence, it's not clear in my mind. I don't know if other people know better, but it was never clear in my mind whether somebody had done something very bad or that somebody had just managed it very badly. But in any case, the opportunity was taken by those in the city who would like to see the downsizing of our public service as much as possible to go out to private enterprise and have a private company bid on it. And it was very interesting because a couple of years ago, the vendor of that of the driver's education in the city came before the school board. And he was sitting on the chair, came to offer public testimony, and said that he was requesting that the contract with the city be renegotiated because it turns out he couldn't make money on the price he was being paid by the city to offer the service. Now, in normal private enterprise, he beat other vendors out by offering a very cheap price, and we, the city, gave him the work to do. And he accepted it at that very cheap price and then wasn't able to provide a service. What was very interesting during his testimony was he sat in front of the Board of Mayor and Aldermen, or the school board, and he and the mayor went back and forth a couple of times. And then the gentleman who was the president or the owner of this private driver's education company said to the mayor, he said, "Well, it's what we agreed in your office, Mr. Mayor. It's, you told me that," and the mayor immediately was all backed up and said, "I told you nothing." And I can understand the mayor's position here, right? I mean, it's not for him to tell a vendor anything. But it was interesting to note that what we learned in that little piece of information was that the mayor had sat in his office with, according to this person, with this vendor and talked about pricing for a contract for driver's education. In any case, private education was privatized, and now we have the mess that we have today. Last night, when this was brought up under new business by Mr. Theriault, he said that something needed to be done, that we had, according to him, we had still existing employees in the city who were very anxious to and regretted the fact that they could no longer provide this service, which they had done well for many years, and nobody questions that, other than the administrative problem that had happened 4 or 5 years ago. But they were very competent. They did the job. They did it well. They did it for Manchester school students, and they did it at times and in places that were amenable to the students. And of course, it was controlled by the school district, so they could make sure that programs were put in place at the right time. You could, for those of you who've got a political viewpoint, or if your political antenna are sharpened, you could see immediately the reaction in the room. Ross Terrio wanting to go back to having the school district supply a service. The mayor immediately jumped in and said, why don't we put this out to bid and have another private vendor bid on it. Art Beaudry stepped in and said, school board member Art Beaudry said, that he supported Mr. Terrio in saying, we have public employees who were capable of doing this service, had done this service, and that, Mayor Gatsis and his friends had their day. They got to privatize it. It didn't work out. It's not working now. We're, I think, as was mentioned by Mayor Gatsis, in a lawsuit with the existing private vendor. The service is not being supplied to students. All our students are having to go all over the place to get driver's education. It's a mess. And it's a mess created by people who only want to privatise everything they can. Just like they privatised Aramark and got rid of all the custodians in the schools. And now we're stuck with that. And they privatised driver's education, and that is a mess. But you could see last night where the lines were drawn that immediately, Mr. Gerard and the mayor both jumped in, and when it was clear they weren't going to carry the day at the end of the meeting, a motion was passed to hand it to the superintendent. That the superintendent should look into this. But clearly that was the fallback position, because the board wasn't ready to take a vote to simply send out another RFP, find another private vendor, and have them do it. And oh, by the way, the last private vendor that we found, just the assistant superintendent, or former assistant superintendent David Ryan, was the gentleman tasked with procuring the new private service. And it just so happened that the one vendor that he brought forward, and he only brought forward one, happened to be a Hooksett resident and a Hooksett guy. And I'm just noting it that Mr. Ryan lives in Hooksett, and I want to be clear. I'm not saying anything bad happened here. I just know that I can imagine. This is what I imagine, that there was a less than robust process. That this was another one of 1,000 tasks to be done. It was like, let's grab somebody, bring them in. Clearly, the vendor is not competent, and so I personally would like to see it go back to the city. But we've seen this now numerous times. We go back over numerous administrations. There is an ongoing attempt in the city of Manchester to undermine the food services in the city, and we've seen ridiculous things go on over the last 2 years about privatizing food service in the city. And we have employees who've worked in our food service, some of them for 35 years. There was a lady retired last year at Hillside Middle School who had done 35 years. She'd managed the kitchen there for 35 years. A lovely person. Nicest person you could meet, always amenable, always sweet, always nice. Did a great job, ran it very well, and was liked by everybody. I'm not anti-private enterprise, ladies and gentlemen, but stripping out the public asset to give money to private enterprise, we see it going on in Manchester all day long, and we know the people who want it. They're ideologically predisposed to that. So that was last night's meeting. If you want to pay attention to some more of this, at last night's meeting, we also had the Medicaid piece. So it turns out that Medicaid reimburses the city of Manchester if a child is on Medicaid and is given nursing services while in school. Then the city can bill Medicaid for those services. And there's a thought that perhaps we're not billing Medicaid adequately for the services that we're supplying through our nursing program. Now, I have to tell you, first of all, I think the very people who support. Well, let me get into what they want to do. So the proposal that was on the agenda for last night, that I presume passed, was that we're bringing in a private company, and now this private company out of, I think it's somewhere in Boscawen, I think it is, some small town in New Hampshire, Bow maybe, or Boscawen. There's a private company coming in, and this private company is going to be paid a percentage of the money being recouped from Medicaid. So at one point it makes sense, right? You'd say, well, they're being incentivized to find additional payments from the federal government for Medicaid. so that we can maximize the amount of money we get in Medicaid. And but then they get between depends 3% of the first amount, then 5%, then 6%, eventually 8% of anything over 2 million that comes back. So just think about this, ladies and gentlemen. The very people who would say, get the federal government out of schools and all the rest of it, have no problem with bringing a private company into our school district, give them up to 8% of the revenue coming in from the federal government in order to find imaginative and expansive ways in which to increase Medicaid reimbursements. So maybe a kid comes in and they're running a temperature, and the nurse says, "Oh, you've got a temperature, little Johnny. Call mom and or give her a Tylenol and call mom." And all of a sudden, that becomes that's billable under nursing assistance for whatever it is. You know how hospital billing goes, which I know little about, other than there are code numbers for all the different things they get billed at different levels. So you can bill the federal government for more once you have Medicaid, and we have with our level of free and reduced lunch in the school district, we have a large number of Medicaid recipients, I suppose, and so we will enhance the billing of Medicaid. So on one side, that makes sense, right? We maximize the amount we get, and therefore, we can continue to be the least. We can add some money into the least well-funded school system in the state of New Hampshire. But it seems to me cynical at its face that the very people who want to privatize everything, it's all about getting private enterprises' snouts into the trough that is the public enterprise. And so as many private noses, hogs' noses, we can get into that trough, sucking out of the trough, the better it is for everybody. And we've seen this happen time and time again. We saw it happen with No Child Left Behind. Some would claim we saw it happen with Common Core. In any case, anytime all of these things are opportunities to bring private enterprise in. Personally, I think that if I were given 8% of the Medicaid billings, or up to 8%, to be clear, it's as low as 3% for I think the first million or million and a half, and then it changes. 1 year it's one set of numbers, and the second year of the contract it's a larger set of numbers, but it's up to 8%. Well, I got to tell you, 8% of $1 million is $80,000, and if you can bring in an extra couple of $1 million in the city of Manchester, $160,000 would be great for me if I were doing it. But why is there any middleman? Why are we, the taxpayers, paying federal taxes on our salaries and our income and paying them into the federal government for programs for lots of things, but some of them for poor people and some of those for disabled and for those less well off than ourselves, plus many other functions of government. And then we bring in some private company from some village in New Hampshire to help what is a $167 million enterprise to better bill Medicaid. You mean you couldn't hire somebody who's got some expertise in Medicaid billing and just hire that person, bring them in, pay them from the school district, and cut out the middle guy? Why is some private company in New Hampshire developing profits and running a business and having to develop invoices and accounts and manage that whole function? It's not just one person, right? That's a business that has to manage that function. I don't believe it could be cost effective, and I see it as just another opportunity to feed at the public trough. And so if you're paying attention to the city of Manchester, and you'll see this happen happen again and again at any opportunity, it's like a reading of the tea leaves on any given night, that if an opportunity comes up in order to strip away the asset a little more, or that opportunity is taken. And we saw that last night in two different places. I want to go to another place. As the night moves on here, just one thing about I've heard people talk about numerous times now, a number of our public representatives, especially some aldermen, say that public employees in Manchester have it so good, and it's so good you don't ever see any teachers leaving, do you? No, because they have it too good. And I challenged Joe Kelly the Vassar on his programme last week. Just challenge is too strong a word. I pointed out to him, I guess, that what he continued to say was incorrect. And I did challenge him to go and check the numbers, because the fact is that we've had teachers, not just those reaching retirement and leaving, but we have substantial numbers of teachers leaving the school district over the last number of years who are just voluntarily leaving. We lost a great teacher at Hillside, a wonderful man who's been there for, he's in his early 30s or something, I would guess, but a wonderful educator, and he's just one individual. But the fact is, you can't continue to say things that are just not true. We can have our disagreements, but when you have this cockamamie worldview based on half thought out ideas and facts that aren't facts at all, but you repeat them often enough, and you've someone like Ed, and I know all these people. I'm not trying to malign them, but he sits next to him, and there's never going to be a hang on a minute, that doesn't have to be true. Certainly, if somebody brings up anything that doesn't meet the ideological view that they have, that person will get immediately, hang on a minute, that's not right. But you can repeat these things out to an audience. I don't know whether he has an audience of 5 or 50. I have no idea, but to keep on repeating to the members of the public in Manchester that, we don't see any public employees leaving, teachers aren't leaving because they have it too good, it's just false. It's factually incorrect. We have teachers leaving because they, for whatever reason, I can't get in their heads as to why they're leaving, but they're leaving, and they're not leaving because some are leaving, of course, when they're pink slipped, they're fired. Some leave due to retirement, but there's a substantial number, something in the 20-ish number. I believe it was 40-something last year, 28 of whom were retirees, and then another 20 who were voluntary, just people leaving the school district. And so I just wanted to bring that up, because I guess it's like the discussion about class sizes, and I heard the mayor again last night talk about, he alludes back to the 42 kids in a class from 4 years ago, and he still thinks that he thinks that some principal was playing fast and loose with things, and this is how it happened. All last year, I was at pains to point out that we had in all the schools in our district, all the grade schools in our district, or elementary schools in our district, bar one, we had 30 kids per class in some of the grades, in every single class. And we're still listening to nonsense about how that wasn't so. And at the end of the meeting last night, ladies and gentlemen, the mayor did challenge the superintendent to come back with the numbers they want to see, because they've added some teachers into the elementary. There's been a downshift from high school down to elementary, which is a good thing. And so there should be some reduction in class sizes in some of the schools. But we're still going to end up with some of our elementary schools with 30 kids in a class. And so they're challenging the superintendent to come back and give us the numbers. Well, if you just to understand the numbers of the 14,100 or whatever kids there were at the end of last year, on any given day, the numbers in the city of Manchester are a snapshot in time. And I can tell you that there was a registration period for new kids in the schools to register. I think it was the 9th and 10th or the 8th and 9th of August. That was the ideal time. If you're listening to this and you haven't registered your kid yet, just go into school tomorrow. You can go into the schools tomorrow. There are people available. I think the secretaries are back on Monday. If they're not back this week, I think they're back on Monday. But you can go into school and register your kid, and you'd be doing everybody a favour if you did that and didn't wait until the morning of school. But believe me, ladies and gentlemen, some people wait until the morning of school, the 5th of September. Some people show up on the 6th and 7th. Some come roaming up here from somewhere on the 10th and 11th. So there will be new people registering for classes in Manchester for weeks to come. There will also be a substantial number of kids who have left the city and they don't give the school department notice of my son. We've moved to Florida, we've moved to Ohio, we've moved to California, we've moved to Maine. People don't do that. They simply move, and then the school finds out that, oh, there used to be 30 kids in this class last year, and 8 of them aren't here this morning. Well, 2 of them are home with the flu, and the other 6 are gone to some other school district. And even within the school district, ladies and gentlemen, a kid who was at Northwest last June might well be in an apartment downtown and be in Beach Street, or they could be in McDonough or Webster or wherever on the 1st of September. So this simplistic notion of, you tell us the numbers, we want to know the numbers. You can shout it as much as you like. It just isn't that easy. So I have great sympathy for those who are trying to manage these things. It's not a simplistic thing. And in the end, the bottom line is that the number of teachers in Manchester at the end of June was higher than the number of teachers who are going to be in Manchester on the 1st of September. The only question is, how many kids will we have? Sadly, I know a number of kids who are in the public school system who are not continuing in the public school system, or whose siblings were intending to come out of private school into the public school system and are not now doing it, solely because of class sizes, especially at the elementary school. I talked to a parent this summer who was in tears, who herself as an educator, a qualified teacher, doesn't work as an educator, who was pulling their kid out of one of the best schools in the city because they just couldn't they couldn't in their good conscience have their third grader in a class of 30 kids, and they weren't going to do it to him. And so long as there was an alternative, they were forced to. They'll find the money somewhere, and they were going to take their kid into a private school, and that's an appalling thing. And now, of course, we've decided not to clean the windows, so when you show up to pick them up, there'll be dust and dirt hanging off the windows by the time we get to May and June. Of course, that'll be 8 or 9 months after we've had an election, so maybe it won't matter so much. Or the parents group can go out there with their ladders and cloths and clean the windows, and we'll have wonderful photographs on the union leader, probably with the mayor standing there pointing up at the guy on the top of the ladder and saying, look at all the wonderful things our community are doing. And maybe we'll get Brady Sullivan or AMR or somebody else to do, or Blue Cross Blue Shield to donate the cloths, the ladder rental and the washing liquid, and they'll get to write a check for $100 and get their names in front of the paper. And that's the way we want to run our school district. Stick with the cleaning window stuff, the small stuff that's easy to understand, ladies and gentlemen. Ask your representatives who are knocking on your doors over the next 2 months, do they or do they not support the reduction of cleaning services in the city schools, and why do they support it? And if they don't support it, what's their plan for actually going to what's their plan for going to fix it? I'd like to say something else to ladies and gentlemen. That is, I have tried. I try very hard to listen to others and hear what they have to say. I don't know if I'm ever going to change 180% from my worldview, but I do try, and I may not be very successful, but it's certainly my intent to try to. I also always try to be respectful to our public representatives, and I've made an effort on numerous times. I try as often as I can when I'm speaking to our public representatives to thank them for their contribution and for their free time that they give up and their interest in our city. And so I don't ever want to stray into areas where I am attacking somebody personally or whatever else, and I don't want to do that now. But I'm sort of putting an asterisk here because there was something that happened in the city last week that was a bridge too far for me, and I just want to note that it's not. I don't want to go down the road of it isn't for want of attacking an individual, and it may be construed that way, and I don't want it to be. But on last Friday, school board member at large, Rich Gerard, on his show, did something that I only became aware of in the last day or two, but because I don't listen to that show, but I went and listened to it online, and effectively what happened was that some well-known not very well thought of, or I don't know how to be not derogatory about the gentleman, a person of questionable intent who was a known anti-Muslim rabble-rouser who has a long history of bigotry and racism. Came into the city of Manchester and supposedly went to visit the mosque. There is the New Hampshire Islamic Society has a mosque on South Willow Street, and it's just a nondescript sort of office building, but that's where they go and people pray, and they pray there 5 times a day. And this gentleman went on Alderman at Large, School Board Member at Large, Rich Gerard's show on the radio, and talked about the Muslim population in Greater Manchester, and said some terrible things. It's important to note that Chief Willard was asked by Rich Gerard to comment on this supposed report issued by this known rabble-rouser. Chief Willard's response was that there was no evidence, and this is according to Rich Gerard's show, that there was no evidence to corroborate the findings of this person who was brought in from outside to look at the mosque in Manchester. This gentleman said that on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being a very serious issue where there was some terrible things happening there and it needed to be shut down immediately, that the mosque was a 10. I found it appalling to listen to somebody on radio saying that there was a what is effectively a house of worship, that there was a house of worship in Manchester where young people were or could be taught to support ISIS and Al Qaeda. He said that they were teaching Sharia law. That sleeper cells could or would or are being developed from this centre. It was appalling stuff, and I just found it. I worry about the unbalanced amongst us who might listen to such a diatribe and believe even 1% of what was said on that radio show. And God help us all if some misinformed, mentally ill or paranoid person listening to that nonsense were to take it seriously and end up taking some action against innocent people in our city. Ladies and gentlemen, be very, very clear that if you don't know it already, there are people in Manchester and in Greater Manchester living in fear today. Innocent people living in fear. And to take that such radical, such dangerous material and present it on the radio waves in Manchester. Well, the First Amendment's the First Amendment, and I support the First Amendment, but it is an appalling thing to do. In my view, and I just, in good conscience, I want to call it out for what I see it to be. I think it's inexcusable. I am surprised by it. I will be bringing it up when I next meet the individual involved. It just doesn't make any sense. And then, of course, the photograph that accompanied this article on the person's website was actually, and on the broadcast, was not a photograph of the actual place where the mosque is on South Willow Street, which is a nondescript building, but rather it was a photograph of the almost complete under construction mosque on Carrazzas Ave in Manchester. You have to know that when you present such biased and uncorroborated, the police chief says, the police chief, who, by the way, amazingly, in my mind, is going to go on this show, as I understand it, this week as a guest host, and he's going to be a guest host on a show that produced that terrible, radical fiction that we had purported as news last Friday morning. I think that's questionable, and I would call on Chief Willard to re-examine his position, and if he's to go on such a show, he should make it plain that he doesn't support that which was being said. I think it's also worth noting that the whole program, the station that support American Family Radio, or whatever it might be called, I just looked into this today, and I saw that it's actually that group is actually named as a suspect group by the Southern Law Poverty Centre, and so the whole thing has shocked me, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sorry if I'm not being as coherent as I would like to be on this topic, because to turn around and say that this is not happening in Alabama, it's not happening in Tennessee, it's not happening south of the Mason-Dixon line, and this is not 1968 or 65 or 52. This is Manchester, New Hampshire, 2017. And we have a school board member at large who puts on his radio show a known anti-Muslim, anti-Islamic individual who produces a document not about the world generally, but about the Muslim community that lives here in Manchester, and says that their house of worship is a center of radicalism, where they're radicalizing people, and where they are ISIS supporters and Al-Qaeda supporters, and that sleeper cells are being created there. That, ladies and gentlemen, people should be called out for that. And I don't think any right-minded person in the city of Manchester, regardless of your political viewpoint, when one of our public representatives brings that level of hatred and vitriol and nastiness and dangerous conversation into the middle of our community, that brings that level of divide. I don't care if only 4 people listen to his radio show. Whoever listened to it heard this, and the purpose, in my mind, was to divide and to ridicule and to promote hatred and distrust, and it may move people to action and cause people to take actions that are terrible, and terrible things can happen. Remember, we have had already an arson attack in Manchester on a convenience store where right-wing Nazi symbols were drawn on the property, and that was sort of because it was an isolated incident, and I never want to give these people, I want to shine a bright light on them, but I don't want to give them a platform either, because this could be a couple of high school kids who don't know any better. But I'm incensed about it, ladies and gentlemen. I want to come back and visit it again. Our city's better than that. Our people are better than that. And I'd like our immigrant friends and our non-immigrant, our Muslim friends who are lifelong American citizens, to know that the community has their back, and that we won't support this xenophobia and hatred. I'm sorry to end on such a sour note, but thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being with us today. I look forward to being with you again next week, and hopefully we can talk about more edifying matters than that. Thanks again, and good night from Jim O'Connell.